Hi everyone, Jason here from spiritualbabies.net. You're joining us for show 5, chapter 5 of the book of Esther, and we're being led through Esther by Rabbi Joshua Neely in Florida, who's done an amazing job so far of unraveling the mysteries of the book of Esther. Thank you for joining us again today.
Thank you for having me on.
We are going to jump straight in. On the third day, Esther put on royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, facing the king's palace, while the king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room, facing the entrance of the palace. So I have to assume, we don't have a plan, that she's kind of in a foyer, and from where he is sitting, they're kind of meeting each other's gaze. Otherwise, I imagine there wouldn't be any point in outlining where everyone is.
Well, she's actually come in from the foyer into the inner court. That's the idea here, right? That being in the inner court is what is punishable by death if you were not invited.
Ooh, okay, because we spoke about that a little bit before, and she said in the previous show, she basically said, "All right, I'm going to go for it," because she didn't want to get involved. And then Mordecai said, it's your place to get involved. And she said, okay, fine, I'll do it. So at this stage, she's gone further than she maybe normally would do. Okay.
Well, it's further than anyone else would do if they had any sense for their own life. Which is something that we're going to see later on in the story of Haman, where he is going to be sort of waiting in the outer room when the king then summons him in.
Okay.
So there's a contrast between her bravery and his trepidation, and this is where we're beginning to see sort of the two characters flip power roles.
Okay.
Where she is now taking the lead, and Haman is becoming more and more unsure as things unfold.
Okay.
One thing I do want to point out, very interesting midrashic teaching, is there seems to be a word missing. Because although the translation helpfully put in, I think the word used was apparel, for what she is wearing, the royal apparel, it actually doesn't say the word clothes in the Hebrew. It just says that Esther was clothed in majesty, in royalness, which, of course, Rashi points out means clothing, right? But there is also a midrash that she was wrapped in malchut in the more metaphysical sense, that she was wrapped in the majesty of God. That this is saying that God is there with her. Okay.
Now, why do I know the word malchut? Where does that come up in a really kind of more common, popular phrase?
Everywhere. I mean, if you're a frequent attendee of services when the Torah is being read on Shabbat, the malchut will show up a lot. Because it's the byword for sovereignty.
Okay, that's right.
The other place you'll find it, and this whole section can be read in this light, is through Kabbalah. Malchut is one of the sfirot, one of the emanations.
Okay.
And the metaphor of the inner and outer court is very much used in mystical traditions.
Ah, very good. Okay. As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court...
Right. But, I mean, it is a good place to ask ourselves what the word malka, what the word queen means. Because it had seemed that the word queen, when Vashti was queen, was somebody who had a separate identity, had their own sort of opinion on how things should be done or shouldn't be done. And then that was very much not in favor after Vashti. And Ahasuerus was very much looking for a yes girl, a queen in name only, not what we would recognize as a queen with authority in and of herself. And that's what Esther has been up until this point. So the question now is, what kind of queen is Esther going to be? And we're going to find out that she's going to be much more powerful and successful than Vashti. Which is very, very ironic that the whole story began because a woman was a little had too much self-authority, and we're going to end up with a queen that has much more authority than Vashti ever could have dreamed of.
As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won his favor. The king extended to Esther the golden scepter which he had in his hand, and Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. The carry on in my brain.
Trust me, there are plenty of people who make all the innuendo you can imagine on Purim.
Yeah, no,
especially after they've had a few drinks.
There are going to be plenty of people listening to this that live in the States that aren't familiar with the Carry On series of English films from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but they are full of double entendres. And
and this is one that would have played very much into one of theirs.
Yeah. What troubles you, Queen Esther? The king asked her, and what is your request? To even half the kingdom, it should be granted to you. So instantly he figures, she's really beautiful. So he's straight away on side. And B, he knows that she wouldn't be there unless it was super important, because you'd have to be some sort of idiot to risk death.
And it's right, because the Hebrew itself does not have the word trouble, but it does have the word request, or what is it that you're asking for.
Okay.
So it's clear that she's coming for something important, as you said. Again, interestingly, midrashically, if you take Hodu to Kush, if you go from India to Ethiopia, the rabbis say, what's the midway point of the empire? What's the half point? That would have been Israel. That would have been the Beit HaMikdash. And of course, this was the time when there was a lot of debate of whether the Persians would or wouldn't allow the Beit HaMikdash to be rebuilt.
Okay.
But yes, I mean, the simple meaning is he's just basically saying, whatever you want, I'll give it. Again, ironically, he's going to kind of end up giving away more than the kingdom to her by the time the story's done.
That kind of interaction, it comes up a few times in stories of this ilk, where the king will say, even to half the kingdom, and no one ever says, oh, actually, you know what, I'll take the half a kingdom.
I was going to ask for a biscuit, but...
That's right, yeah. Can I use your loo? But no, I'll take the half a kingdom, we're all good. If it please your majesty, Esther replied, let your majesty and Haman come over to the feast that I have prepared for him. The king commanded, tell Haman to hurry and do Esther's bidding. So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. The king asked Esther, what is your wish? It shall be granted you. What is your request? Even to half the kingdom, it shall be fulfilled. My wish, replied Esther, my request. Does it say, is it written exactly that way? Because that seems it seems kind of over. My wish, replied Esther, my request, seems a kind of very good English, if you know what I mean. It's very well written.
It's actually, it would be, Esther replied and said, my wish, or my ask and my request. Okay. And then we go on to verse 8 to finish off the quote.
If your majesty will do me the favour, if it please your majesty to grant my wish and accede to my requests, let your majesty and Haman come to the feast which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do your majesty's bidding.
But it's odd, right? There's some very weird, there's some awkwardness going on, because she invited the king and Haman to a party, which is kind of unusual, you might think, in the modern world, of a wife is inviting her husband to a party with his buddy. What? I mean, are you inviting me to a party in my own house? I mean, it's not like she's going somewhere else to set up this. This is obviously still happening in the palace, because women were not allowed to just go book a hotel room for, a ball. So, A, why is she inviting the two of them? Why not just talk to him right now? B, why, once he comes, does she invite him and Haman to another party the next day? So there's a number of different ways to unpack this. So one is just a very simple psychological kind of analysis of what's going on here, the transition of the character of Esther, which is, he asks her, what do you want? And she chokes. And she's like, I just wanted to invite you to a party. And he's like, okay. And so they go and they have the party, and then he says, so what is it you want? And he's like, another party. And this is sort of a way of her building up her courage. She can't quite spit out what she actually wants each time. So that's one sort of very simplistic psychological way of looking at it. Another is much more cunning, is that she is asking the king to bring Haman, because this is going to be a way of building rivalry between him and Haman. As we know, the king is very susceptible to other people's opinions. And if he thinks that there's some sort of scheme going on between Haman and Esther against the king, then it will make him much more likely to be antagonistic to Haman. So the one power she has as queen at this stage in the story is to try and manipulate the emotions of the king and to use his jealousies and his fickleness to her advantage. And so by doing this, she's sort of sowing the seeds of doubt about Haman just enough so that when she drops the bombshell, it will be able to crack his loyalty to Haman and make him turn on him, which is going to be a very interesting scene in and of itself. On top of that, we get the one last awkward thing in the final sentence of verse 8, which is, I will do your majesty's bidding, I think is the translation, which is, I'll do the word of the king. I will fulfill the command of the king, which is like, well, haven't you learned from Vashti? You always do the command of the king. This is actually taken in the traditional reading as being that the king had been pestering her constantly about what nation she was from. And that what she is teasing here is, I'm going to tell you tomorrow.
Ah, okay.
Which, of course, is true, because that is, in fact, the big reveal that she makes during her next day's speech. So the two feasts have happened, and Haman's feeling pretty good about himself.
That day Haman went out happy and light-hearted, but when Haman saw Mordecai at the palace gate, and Mordecai did not rise or even stir on his account, Haman was filled with rage at him. I can just imagine, Haman's there, he's feeling pretty good, he's got an excellent job, he's got more money than he knows what to do with, and it's that one guy, and if he just didn't let it bother him, Haman could probably go on having a great day, but there's that one guy. So yeah, I imagine that at this stage, Haman would just about do anything to get Mordecai out of his, make Mordecai humble.
Right, which is, as we talked about before, is really just Haman's fatal flaw. And this anger is going to put him in a position to bring himself down. If he was angry and was able to control himself better, then what happens in chapter 6 wouldn't happen. And he might maybe be able to get away with what he's got going, but he basically sets himself up for all of this to fall in on itself.
So he's playing the long game. Nevertheless, Haman controlled himself and went home. He sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh. And Haman told them about his great wealth and his many sons.
Like, I am so wealthy, and I have so many, sons, and I have been promoted above everybody else, and I'm top of the game, and this is king of the world. Well, almost, Mom. And, I mean, he is basically, I just always picture this as him pacing up and down in the room with all of his friends and wife there, going, well, who am I? Who is this Mordecai guy not to bow down to me? Look at me. Look at what I've accomplished. I am everything. And he's just stalking mad, bounding up and down in the room. And they're trying to sort of calm him down, saying, yes, we know you're great, we know.
And all about how the king had promoted him and advanced him above the officials and the king's courtiers. What is more, says Haman, Queen Esther gave a feast, and besides the king, she did not have anyone but me. And tomorrow, too, I am invited by her along with the king. So, because at this stage, no one knows who Esther is really. They don't know her backstory. They don't know her relationship with Mordecai. I can't imagine how he's going to feel when she kind of lets it slip, and then he realizes there's a connection.
We know exactly how he's going to feel, because his reaction is just glorious in chapter 7.
Yet all this means nothing to me. Every time I see that Jew, Mordecai, sitting in the palace gate, really, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? That he goes with the title. He goes with the Jew Mordecai. Not just Mordecai, the Jew Mordecai, sitting in the palace gate. Then his wife, Zeresh, and all his friends say to him, let a stake be put up 50 cubits high, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then you can go gaily with the king to the feast. Don't let this guy upset you. We'll just have him slaughtered and then you can have a good party afterwards. The proposal pleased Haman.
Nothing puts you in a good mood like having murdered an enemy.
No. The proposal pleased Haman, and he had the stake put up. So I think we briefly talked about this before, and isn't there some kind of argument as to whether it was a stake?
Well, the problem is the Hebrew word that's used here. Yitlu is in context. This literally means to suspend someone from a tree. The word that's used here is eitz, but eitz can also just mean any wooden thingy. So the question is Mordechai being hung from a tree, as we would expect to happen in European societies, and indeed that's why many European translations use the word hanging, because when you suspend something on a tree, it can often mean hanging it. Or was he treated the way that people in ancient Persia were treated, which was usually by having them impaled on the tree-like pole? And certainly the historical evidence would lean towards saying impaling is more likely than hanging. That was simply the more common punishment in the world of Persia. But yes, the text itself is able to be read both ways, and it's not really something that a person should get very upset about one translation or the other.
You shouldn't get hung up over it.
I set that up nicely.
Right, I think we're done with 5. Was there anything else we need to slip in the end?
Well, one little thing I just want to slip in is, again, Haman's presumptuousness of how he is setting himself up for his own downfall. Because the very end of this is, yes, he's happy about the idea, let's go murder my enemy. And what does he do? He doesn't go and talk to the king first. He sets up the stake. Right? And that arrogance, or hubris, if we were talking about a Greek play, of thinking that even though it's not his right to kill someone, that he should go ahead and make the murder weapon, which would have been quite prominent, and we know that because it's mentioned by one of the other king's advisors later on, is just the height of arrogance. The hubris is just staggering. Of, okay, you know what? You're right. I'm just going to go ahead and kill him now. I'll kill all the other Jews on the scheduled day. So yeah, let's just go ahead and put up this giant stake, and I'll kill him when I get a chance, and then I'll go talk to the king.
It's a mistake.
Wow, you're on good form today.
It's a good job we're finishing up now. Right, so that's it. Join us next time for Chapter 6. Thank you very much for giving us your time again today, Rabbi.
My pleasure. If
you would like to listen to more of what the Rabbi has to say, you will find links at the end of this video that you can click to go to Rabbi Joshua Neely's YouTube channel. And on the YouTube channel, you're going to find weekly Torah shows and some other great stuff. There are at least 2 or 3 new ones a week, and they're well worth watching. And we'll see you all again next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.